Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today. It is January 25th, a Wednesday. It's about 3 p.m. as I am recording this, and well, it's World War III. We should be terrified. We should be scared to death. If your family is not related to a Saiyan, if you are not Krillin, then you should be terrified because your power level is not over 9,000, and that means you're in trouble. I know, even though there's 60 million people who love Vegeta, and the bad references to Dragon Ball Z, 60 million people will get it. Everyone else is saying, I have no idea what you're talking about. Let's get serious. Realistically, what we've been told so far today is that the world is about 90 seconds away from World War III. Should be scared. What does this have to do with Joe Biden releasing 31 M1 Abrams to the Ukraine? What does that have to do with South Korea, Japan? How is this going to affect your safety wherever you are in the world watching this today? We're going to try and address all of that. And I hope it will help a lot of people understand what's going on and what will be going on very soon. But first, we do want to mention that if you are watching the show, we welcome you and thank you for being part of our audience. We do long-form political commentary, and every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you. We reach out as much as we can to speak to everyone in the world every Sunday to hear what you have to say, because we believe in the First Amendment. We believe in your right to free speech about these issues that affect all of us. And so we hope you'll join us every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. One caveat to that, very quickly, we're using our backup system right now. Our main computer is virtually dead. We are trying to put the money together to get a professional to work on that so we can be back at the main quality that we provide to you. So we thank you for putting up with our backup systems as we try and go over these issues with you. That said, okay, the jokes about Vegeta and the Saiyans and Dragon Ball Z, let's put that all aside. Let's get serious. We know that it has now been announced that the Doomsday clock, the countdown to nuclear war, has been put at 90 seconds. We know that the war in the Ukraine with Russia is escalating. We know that we are seeing problems around the world. What does this mean? What's going on here? Well, we've been talking about this for quite some time, and we have heard over and over again that there have been many leaders who've been telling us for years now that World War III is imminent, that it's just around the corner. And we've been talking about this for more than 2-3 years. The fact is, we don't believe World War III is the realistic outcome. What we are looking at is 3 regional wars, of which Ukraine versus Russia is one of them that takes care of Europe. There's the Middle East with Iran, and then there's the Southeast Asia region with China and North Korea, which involves South Korea, Japan, Taiwan. That's what we see as the major conflicts going forward, and we think those are 3 regional wars that will take place. And we've explained it in many videos over the years, and we have only gotten more and more confirmation that that is probably what the future holds for everyone. But let's deal with the current issue and how it's affecting the rest of the world and what we can see from that. Very simply, we see the latest news that has come out so far is that Joe Biden has now decided to send approximately 31 M1 Abrams tanks to the Ukraine. This is in part because Germany has resisted up until now to send their Leopard 2 tanks to the Ukraine so that Ukraine would be able to better fight Russia, especially as this spring, Russia is expected to send in their tank troops to try and take over that country or to solidify its position. And this is considered by many people as an escalation, both on the part of Russia and the United States and NATO. Let's think about this. We were talking about this recently. Most recently, about 5 days ago, as you can see in the corner here, we were talking about the impact of Russia and Ukraine and the leadership of the Biden-Harris administration. Why wasn't Germany willing to release their tanks through Poland and various other countries to allow their tanks to be used by the Ukraine in this war? Why is it that the United States is putting over $100 billion into the Ukraine war, and we're going to see that continue? The fact is, leadership is lacking, and everyone in the world is looking for the United States to step up its leadership, because the United States is the leading cause why we are dealing with Russia versus Ukraine, why we are seeing a coalition between Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea against Ukraine, and de facto against NATO and the United States. This all goes back to the policies, or lack of policies, as we have highlighted over the years, of the Biden-Harris administration in terms of its foreign policy. When the United States ran away from Afghanistan, leaving behind our weapons, leaving behind money, creating the first terrorist nation of the world, and giving them the first terrorist army of the world, well, that was the final straw. That was the tipping point, and that has led us to where we are today. When we abandoned 5,000 Americans to this day in Afghanistan, that told the rest of the world the United States neither had a plan nor was it willing to defend its own allies. Because if the United States would not do the very first principle of every government, protect its own people, well, then its allies have no shot. If we're not going to take care of 5,000 of our people, we're not going to help Japan or South Korea, Germany, NATO, or anyone else. We don't care. Because Joe Biden was focused on elections, and he still is. And that's the problem. The world knows that Joe Biden is focused on domestic politics and elections, and he's not focused on the consequences of his actions, the reactions of the rest of the world to a lack of leadership and a lack of foreign policy. It's just that clear. It was after Joe Biden decided to run away from Afghanistan. Whether you agree with leaving Afghanistan or not, it doesn't matter. The way he did that in abandoning American citizens directly influenced Russia and the rest of the world. They knew he was weak, that he didn't have a plan, that he wasn't taking into account the consequences of his actions. And that emboldened Iran, that emboldened China, that emboldened Russia. It was after that that Putin decided to start taking steps to move towards Ukraine. And every step he took closer to that, we got mixed messages from Joe Biden. If you may recall, and on this channel we do, Joe Biden was talking about at that time, first trying to convince the Ukrainians to just give away their property, to just give Russia the land and to let it go. And when that failed, then he started talking about having sanctions against Russia, which Russia really wasn't concerned about. And in fact, on the short term at least, that helped Russia. Even to this day, that has improved the position of Russia's economy. So there's a problem that we see, and that has escalated, and here we are today because of the consequences of each and every one of those events. These are consequences that were very predictable. We've been predicting them consistently, and the rest of the major news media and many of the world leaders easily predicted this as well. And so we've seen the dominoes falling because of this. Let's focus again. What are we seeing right now? Because we've been covering this. And again, 5 days ago, you can see what we were talking about. Germany did not want to take action because they don't want to be the lead. The United States is the lead. Joe Biden is the one who said that there would be sanctions. Joe Biden is the one who said that NATO was going to give the funding to the Ukraine. The United States, by multiples, by factors of money, have been providing the support for the Ukraine. This is our war. It is a proxy war. Both physically and economically, we are the lead of this, not the Ukraine. And because of the way that we have done this, the rest of the world is waiting to see what we do. So Germany, 5 days ago, made it very clear. They were not going to put their Leopard tanks into Ukraine until the United States did. The reason for that, as we explained previously, is because to put these tanks into the Ukraine puts troops into the Ukraine. A lot of people aren't talking about this. The Ukraine does not have the technology, the sophistication, the troops to be able to maintain these tanks, to use them effectively. They need people who know how to build these tanks, how to repair these tanks, how to maintain these tanks, whether it's the Leopard 2 out of Germany or the Abrams M1 out of the United States. In fact, that's one of the reasons why up until today, the United States was reluctant to give M1 Abrams. They were saying, they can't take care of this. They don't know how to handle this equipment. And so that was the excuse. And Germany said, well, that is our excuse too, so we're not going to do it unless the United States is. Because to give them the tanks is to give them advisors, that's what they'll be called, advisors, just like in Vietnam, advisors to go into that country to teach them how to use the tanks, to teach them how to maintain them, and to help them repair these weapons as they engage with the Russians. Which means that puts troops into the Ukraine. If we're correct, and I don't see any reason how this won't be the case, we're going to be sending troops in. Probably under the title of NATO and that not the United States, so that gives Joe Biden some distance there. But in doing that, Germany has to do the same thing because the same situation exists. The Ukrainians don't know how to run the Leopard 2. They need someone else to come in and repair it, to teach them how to use it, to help them to target the Russian tanks. So we are seeing an escalation, and that escalation is directly tied to the United States. So when Germany said, no, we won't do this unless the leader of this war, de facto Joe Biden, if he's not willing to do it, we're not going to do it because it's our troops. And we need to know that we're going to have support. In the past, they might have done it because implicitly the United States would always back them up. But that's not the case. Look at what's happening in Japan. Look at what's happening in South Korea. As we have pointed out many times, Japan is building up its own military because they don't trust Joe Biden. They don't trust America at this moment. They don't believe the United States will actually back them up in a regional conflict, even if whether it's nuclear or not. Neither does South Korea. In fact, that's why South Korea is now saying they want nukes, that they want to have their own nuclear weapons. I mean, if you think I'm wrong about that, just look at some of the recent news. South Korea is talking about building their own nuclear weapons because the United States isn't talking about providing them nuclear weapons, which I think you will see a capitulation here. I think the world has realized Joe Biden is weak, and he is being led. Germany made the United States put tanks into the Ukraine. South Korea is going to force the United States to give them nuclear weapons. Otherwise, South Korea will do it on its own. And we know that South Korea is building up. We know that they are continuing to increase their troops. Now, when I say Germany has been leading this, that they were the ones who forced the United States, we see that the United States reversed because of the pressure from Germany. So the news is out there, but you're not being told the whole story. You're not being given the information to understand what's going on because they don't want you to understand it. They don't want you to think about the consequences. And I think that's the biggest problem. The biggest thing leading us closer to World War III, why the Doomsday clock is counting down, isn't because of the United States. It isn't because, let me rephrase that, it's not because of the actions around the world, it's because of the United States. It's because of the lack of leadership, the lack of a plan, the lack of an understanding of the consequences. Again, this all comes out of Afghanistan, what we've already seen. We've already seen the failures of the Biden administration. They abandoned 5,000 Americans in in Afghanistan. They abandoned 10,000 Americans in the Ukraine. We heard Lester Holt as he asked Joe Biden, what are you going to do about those Americans last February in 2022? And Joe Biden said they're on their own. They'll figure it out. He left them. Again, this tells every ally, you're on your own. The United States isn't going to be there. And so we are seeing the results of that. We're seeing Japan build up its own military. Yeah, that's good because China has something to worry about besides the United States. It's bad because that means Japan has a military. And Japan has more enemies than just China. There's also South Korea and all of Korea and the rest of Southeast Asia. And many of these countries still don't trust Japan because of World War II and what Japan did, South Korea in particular. And South Korea has its own problems with North Korea and China. And so they want to be able to defend themselves. And many people don't know this. South Korea is the 7th largest arms dealer in the world. They just made a deal with the UAE in the Middle East to provide them more arms. That's going to catapult South Korea to the 4th largest arms dealer manufacturer in the world, which means they're gearing up for a war, either to protect themselves from China or potentially to protect themselves from North Korea and Japan. They don't have trust, and the United States isn't there to back them up. At least that's their point of view, which is why they are demanding nukes from the United States or they'll make their own. This is why they are reacting to not just what China is doing or North Korea, but also Japan. So we are seeing an escalation around the world. And that's two of the regional wars that we have been predicting and fearful of. We have Europe with Russia, and now we have North Korea, China, Japan, South Korea, all arming as well. The world is building up to a major conflict. And we see that Iran, yes, they have been delayed because of their current internal issues, dealing with riots and protests because women are getting killed for showing their hair. But Iran has also been a major player in the Middle East and is threatening the rest of the Middle East. Their growth of nuclear weapons, whether declared or hidden, doesn't matter. They've always been trying to build up a nuclear arms capability. And they have been improving their missiles throughout the entire process. Whether there was an Iran nuclear deal or not, they've been building up their capability with missiles to reach more and more of the enemies that they claim. That would be Israel and the United States. That has never stopped. And we know that their efforts in bolstering terrorism, well, the Iran nuclear deal, according to then Secretary of State John Kerry, the United States was funding it. He said so. John Kerry said so on CNBC News in January of 2016, that the United States was indirectly funding global terrorism. And so they haven't stopped their actions. That's why we see Iran working so closely with Russia, because it helps in their effort to destroy the United States, Europe, and Israel. So we have those three regions, and they are all escalating. Iran at the moment delayed because of what's happening with their internal rioting, which they will resolve because they're a brutal dictatorship. They've had riots before, and their answer is just kill the people who are rioting. That's terrifying. So that's the scenario we are looking at in the world. And the consequences are that the United States still is not providing leadership. They're not. Germany just proved it. Germany said, here's the line in the sand. You send in the M1 Abrams tanks, then we will send in the Leopard 2. Only after the United States taking that first step, a step that, well, the dominoes lead to U.S. troops in the Ukraine. Germany didn't want to do it. They didn't want to commit their troops. They want the United States so they can say, we're just NATO. We're being dragged into this. We have no choice. So that when the people say, we don't want to be involved in a war, they say, we have no choice. The United States did this. they're going to blame it on the United States. And every German soldier, every NATO soldier that dies, that's going to be blamed on Joe Biden. The Allies are going to turn on him, and he is the scapegoat to get them out of this because he's the one who drugged them into it. When he started setting up the sanctions and forcing NATO to put those sanctions on Russia, he brought them in. It's on him. And they're maintaining that. Now, some people will say, well, Mike, the Ukraine-Russian war, it's a bad war. Okay. You say Russia are bad guys. I agree. I don't want Russia to be more powerful. I don't want to see Putin barn stomping because after they're done with Ukraine, the next step is going to be Lithuania and Estonia and Latvia. He's going to go to the north. And then shortly after that, probably to Poland. And the Polish people are very aware of that. The Estonians and Lithuanians and Latvians, they're very aware of this. So they're very, very concerned about this because they can see the writing on the wall, the next steps down the road. They're understanding the consequences. The Biden-Harris administration isn't. And so they're slowly bringing us to that point. And we're seeing the stress on NATO because of this in a massive way, because this is fracturing NATO. Poland wants to send in the Leopard 2 troops. In fact, they were going to send in the Leopard 2 tanks that they got from Germany, whether Germany said yes or not. And that forced Joe Biden to act even faster, because otherwise you would have Poland revolting essentially against Germany, which has a direct impact on NATO. Now you would have an internal conflict in NATO, which would make it weaker. And that's a problem. So the United States had to capitulate to Germany to prevent Poland from going rogue with German tanks. Again, all of this still brings us back to, and that's bringing troops into Ukraine. It is escalating the situation. But does that lead to World War III? I mean, that's what the Doomsday clock is telling us. Even as CNN says, no, it's really not that bad. The clock is winding down. That's what we've been talking about for years. And that's what the latest coverage is saying. It's escalating. It's not just the $100 billion that the United States has put in there, not to count the rest of the world, which is several multiples less, but this is escalating. It isn't having any resolution short term. And for all the promises that you were told throughout 2022 that this would be a month-long war, that this would be a 2-month, 3-month, 6-month war, the reality, as we said back in February of 2022, this is a multi-year war. This is a war that will last 2, 3, possibly 10 years. This is an Afghanistan or an Iraq in Europe. This is not going to end. Even if someone declares himself the winner, this isn't going to end. There will still be fighting going on for a long, long time. That's the reality, which means it is imperative that we have leadership, and we don't. Now, throughout this, a lot of people may say, but Mike, this is all foreign policy. It has nothing to do with the United States. It has nothing to do with people here in America. And that's why many Americans don't take this very seriously, or they ignore it, why the mainstream news media in the United States doesn't really talk about this. Because most Americans aren't thinking, well, how does it affect me? And the answer is, well, in part, we have open borders. It means that terrorist factions of whichever group can enter the United States and attack American citizens. And they are doing that. We have seen that. We have seen terrorists from Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Antifa, aligned with Iran that have entered the United States over the last 18 months, at least 6 that we know of that have been caught, who are planning to assassinate our leaders. That's a fact. That happened. 2022, summer. So we know they are coming into the United States because of the open border policy, and they are attempting to destroy our nation and our leadership. That's happening. And that will only escalate as we see more active fighting, when U.S. troops in maintaining those tanks are involved, and they will be blamed for every death of a Russian soldier or any incidental death of any Ukrainians. There's no win in that scenario. We will only have more and more troops, more and more advisors coming in, and someone to protect the advisors going in. So that's another aspect of why America matters. This is how we got into Vietnam, because we had to protect the people we sent in to advise the people we, by proxy, were supporting in a war we wanted to have. That's the same scenario here. We add more advisors, and then we have to have someone protect those advisors, and then we have to have someone protect the people we have protecting the advisors. And now we're in a shooting war. It's the same scenario. This is Vietnam. In many, many ways, it's the same scenario, except it's larger, and the impact is more worldwide, and its implications lead to 3 world regional conflicts, not World War III. And that terrifies me, because most people aren't thinking of it that way. They're not thinking about the terrorists that are coming through our open borders. They're not thinking about how this can escalate into another Vietnam-type scenario, or an Iraq scenario, or an Afghanistan scenario, because these are all the same model that we are following. People aren't thinking about how is it going to affect me in terms of inflation. Yet another way this is affecting American citizens directly. We spend $100 billion, and we're spending more. Those tanks cost money. To build tanks to replace them or to repair them is going to cost money. Sending them over, troops, and we're sending additional monies on top of that, billions upon billions. We just sent another $2.5 billion on top of the $100 billion we've already sent in the last year. There is no end to this swamp, this vortex of money. And whether you agree with the Ukraine or not, whether you think Russia is a bad guy or not, and we do think they're bad guys, this has no end short term. This hole keeps getting larger and larger, and we keep dumping more and more money in with no hope of ever having it end or getting anything back for it. So this is directly having an impact on the U.S. economy. That's money that could go to feeding our poor, to feeding children, to providing services for homeless and our veterans, which I would love to see. $100 billion would resolve, for the most part, our homeless problem. And we could take care of feeding poor children around the United States. With $100 billion, we could tackle both of those issues and resolve them if the will of our politicians was there. We could fix that. Whether you're a Republican or Libertarian or Democrat or progressive, $100 billion takes care of that. But instead, we're funding a war, which is increasing our national debt, increasing our deficit, increasing the pressure on our inflation. This is money we don't have. And the interest rates are going higher and higher. It's being more expensive to just keep printing this money. And unlike Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, we don't agree with modern monetary theory that says you can just print money forever and it has no impact. I'm 55, or about to be 55. I remember the banana republics. I remember reading about the Weimar Republic. You can print money all day, that's correct. But inflation will react to that. The people will be hurt, in particular, the poor. This is a problem for poor people in America, and it will make the problem even worse. So we have 3 aspects of how this is affecting you in America. Terrorism and individuals who don't agree with America's position on any of these conflicts, whether it's in Southeast Asia or Europe, it doesn't matter, or even the Middle East, they all have a reason to enter the United States and try and disrupt our government and our people. It has an impact in terms of troops, because the process we are in leads to more and more troops in harm's way. And it affects us on an economic level, especially if you are poor. because this is money that could be going to help you and our internal issues, and instead it's going to another country with no gain for this. We get nothing for this. If the Ukraine wins, we get nothing. If the Ukraine loses, we get nothing. We will never get this money back, but we will be paying for it for generations. Again, doesn't matter if you agree with the Ukraine or not, whether you hate Russia or not, and we do not support Russia, it still has no net return. We just lose on those three aspects. And then it has an international aspect. Every American business around the world, every company that does business overseas, every American citizen that travels overseas, whether for business or pleasure, you're affected. Your life is threatened by these three different regions that all have a reason to attack an American citizen by their viewpoint. These different factions will be targeting Americans domestically and internationally, and they'll be attacking American businesses domestically and internationally because their viewpoints say that's okay. So we see a danger directly to American citizens. And of course, as an extension of that, we see this affecting NATO. If you're in the United Kingdom, Canada, Germany, France, you're all being affected by this. In fact, in terms of terrorism aspects, you're even more affected about this than the United States. You don't have an ocean protecting you with thousands of miles that these individuals have to cover, and you don't have to travel through South America or Mexico to get into the United States, or more easily through Canada. You don't have to go through that process. The open border policies of the European Union make it simple for these bad actors to enter into your nations. Europe is feeling the impact of this and has been for several years, but more importantly, right now, they're really going through the ringer on this, which is part of the reason why Germany said, we don't want to take the first step, because they would be the focal point of that reaction of these various factions that do not want the United States to win. This is why it's a big deal. Look, you may think that defeating Russia is a good thing, that defeating China is a good thing, North Korea and Iran, good thing. We do. We think those are all great ideas. It's all about how this is being done, and the most important factor about how it gets done is having leadership that has a plan, that understands the consequences of what they are doing. Joe Biden doesn't. Under Joe Biden, General Mark Milley, a traitor, someone who should be arrested for treason, we believe, and have strongly believed for many years now, they're leading the United States in the wrong direction because they don't understand the consequences of what they are doing. They don't care. They're looking at the politics. They're looking at having a good news cycle for the next 2-3 days, not understanding that in the next month, in the next 6 months, this is still going to be a problem, and it will be a bigger problem at that point. You know, I wish this was as simple or as easy to mock and ridicule as saying, well, this is just like Dragon Ball Z. You know, it's like the Namek saga. I know a lot of people don't know what I'm talking about who don't watch anime. 60 million people around the world do. Where it took a 5-minute battle took 180 minutes or 3 hours, 9 episodes to resolve a 5-minute battle to destroy a planet. And that's, you know, that's fun. It's escapism. It's a joke. Okay, we get that. But this is the real world. And if you're not paying attention to the details, given time, those details affect you anyway. Maybe you think we're wrong. Maybe you think that Joe Biden is showing a great amount of leadership. And if you believe that, please explain to us why Germany had to blackmail him into sending Abrams tanks that he didn't want to send. If you think that the Biden administration is doing a great job internationally, then please explain to me why Japan is rejecting the U.S.-Japan Treaty of 1960 and building its own military so that they can have offensive capabilities. If you think he's doing such a great job, and Kamala has been a wonderkin for American international politics, then why is South Korea demanding that the United States put nukes in that nation or they will make their own? Why is it that we are seeing more and more pressure from Iran to be able to help Russia and China to kill Americans and Israelis? The fact is, Joe Biden isn't providing leadership because he isn't taking into account the consequences of his actions, and the major news media are more than happy to hide that information from you. Because most Americans say, well, it's foreign policy. I don't pay attention to that. You don't have to. It's still going to affect you. What we need to do now is demand from our elected officials, make a plan. I'm not saying it has to be a great plan. I'm not telling you that it's the best plan. I'm not even going to tell you that it's a good plan. But we need a plan. We need to understand the consequences, or at least to assume certain consequences and act on that. We have to demand this from our elected leaders. Because if we don't, and we let them continue as they have been doing, it only gets worse. Because they don't know what they're doing. And they don't understand the consequences. And those consequences are piling up for the United States, for NATO and our allies, and the rest of the globe. But we look forward to hearing what you have to say about this. Do you agree? Do you think it's going to be 3 regional wars or World War III? Do you think there's a way to stop this? Do you think the Biden-Harris administration has a plan that prevents us from 3 regional wars or World War III? Do you think NATO believes that the Biden-Harris administration has that plan and understands the consequences? Do you think South Korea and Japan has an understanding of what Joe Biden is doing and what the plan is? We look forward to hearing your answers in the comments, and we look forward to seeing you every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with us. Final little thought here. On January 30th, 9 p.m., I will be appearing with Larry Sharp on his roundtable. He has a weekly Monday night roundtable. I will be one of those individuals in that roundtable. Again, that's January 30th on The Sharp Way with Larry Sharp. I'm looking forward to it. We're going to be talking about wokeism and how woke is America. It'll be an interesting conversation. Until the next time, folks, I hope you're well, and thank you for being part of our audience and for giving us the backup instruments that we are using. Thank you.